Hello and welcome or welcome back to me. Today, I'd like to take you on a little trip down memory lane to have a very timely review of the Barcelona, Catalonia, and the Austrian Grand Prix. I do have a book for Spain, however, as my reading has been the bottleneck in this project so far, I decided to read that for the second Spanish race and skip this one. I thought we could just do 2 Grand Prix in one, since there's one without a book. As per usual, we'll talk about the races first. We'll go in order, so we'll do Barcelona, then Austria, and then we'll talk about the book at the end. Without further procrastination, even though I'd really rather forget both of these races, let's get into it. So the first race was the Barcelona Grand Prix. I have to heavily consult my notes because honestly, it has been a hot minute, unfortunately. I do hope it's not gonna stay this delayed forever, but for now, this is what we have to do. It was an eventful race, I think. Considering how many people didn't finish the race, you would think I'd have slightly more notes, but somehow I don't. Let's kind of rewind. During quali, we had a red flag during Q3 because Charles Leclerc binned it. So he started in 10th, and that was fine. I don't know how to recount this race properly. Let's do it this way. So Leclerc did get up to 7th in the first lap, though, and Verstappen up to 5th from 5th. Very confused about that. Stroll had issues with his gearbox, and he DNF'd. Bottas was told to retire the car. Hulkenberg pitted, but his engine just stopped working. So he was out. Then yellow flag for Alonso on the grass, and then there was a virtual safety car. Albon was out at one point, but then he came back, and he was just like 12 laps down from everybody else. It was very confusing. This is how confusing this race was. I didn't even write down when Behrman went out, but I guess he did. Antonelli actually overtook Russell for second, and then he stopped on the side of the track. I was unhappy, because he is currently a championship leader, and I'd rather someone else be championship leader. So I was not sad about it. However, clearly Schadenfreude doesn't get me very far, because basically the exact same time Leclerc slowed down with a power steering issue and then was also out. So there was a virtual safety car for, I guess, both of them. And then the virtual safety car ended in lap 65. And then I guess there was one racing lap. Hamilton maintained his lead because during the Alonso's virtual safety car, he ended up in first, because he pitted and then he came out in first. So he ended up winning the race from second to first. We'll take it because he still finished ahead of a Mercedes. That did, however, also mean that he is now ahead of Charles in the championship, and Charles is down to 4th, and I'm unhappy about that. But he also is ahead of Russell. So he's at this point in second. So yeah, overall, 8 people retired. Hamilton got driver of the day with 52% of the vote, which I think is deserved. This was the first race of the season that was won by a non-Mercedes driver. I was in 2 minds about it, because obviously I was happy that happened because the Mercedes domination is pissing me off. And obviously I was also happy that it was a Ferrari, because that shows that the Ferrari can indeed do that. But I was also annoyed because it wasn't Charles. And I'm afraid I am a Charles fan first and a Ferrari fan second. So yeah, whatever good thing happens, it should have happened to Charles, basically. Yeah, good for Ferrari, good for Lewis. Obviously, happy for him to have won this race. But at the same time, I need Charles to win more races. That was the Barcelona Grand Prix. A race to forget, basing this off the fact that like a full third of the drivers retired. Before I move along to the Austrian Grand Prix, let's have a look at the quotes I wrote down. My favorite part, honestly, is just them being absolutely sassy on the radio. I think my favorite one was Verstappen. This is really early on. This is like, I don't know, lap 10 or something, saying, struggling with the tires, I'm even wobbling on the straights. It's quite impressive. I can appreciate a sarcastic fuck when I meet one, you know? There was just Lewis being gentle parented by his race engineer when he said, am I catching them? And then he was told, you are catching them really well. I just found that kind of funny and sweet. I just had one note from the commentators themselves. I don't remember who this was about, but it just said, the overtake is in a straight line. You don't need a neck for that, which I think out of context is maybe even funnier. I don't know who was complaining about their neck or who was having a bad time, but I do think, if I remember correctly, Barcelona was quite hard on the neck with all the turns, so I guess that's why. That was Barcelona. Let's move swiftly along to the Austrian Grand Prix, which I actually also did not enjoy. However, I did have a really nice time watching it outside of actually the race itself, because I was actually in Germany, so I got to watch it with some friends of mine who invited me, and it was really nice. And well, I invited myself, but no. Potato. I had a lovely time. If you're watching, thank you so much for having me very voluntarily. I actually watched it on German Sky, which was just kind of funny. I've not watched a race with German commentary before. It was good, I guess, because I'm usually not in favor of any of the British drivers whenever they are kind of commentating a race kind of from the perspective of a British driver or wanting a British driver to do well. It tends to annoy me because that's usually the part of the team that I want to win less. So this was a refreshing change. However, the race itself was still depressing. So actually Russell was on pole with Leclerc in second and Hamilton in third. That was great. I was happy about that. However, didn't last long. In lap 1, Hamilton overtook Leclerc. Within the first 7 laps, Leclerc was down from second to fifth, and I was not happy. Right, and then Leclerc pitted, and then I just saw Leclerc overtaking Bortoleto for 10s and had a slight bout of depression. This was like a lot of pitting, which I didn't all write down because quite honestly I couldn't be bothered. I just wrote down Russell and Piastri and many pit, and then I wrote down the order. We had more Verstappen-Hamilton battle. That was good. Then Sainz stopped on the start-finish straight, and there was a yellow flag. And then there was a virtual safety car. Yeah, he kept getting overtaken. It was not fun to watch. I did not enjoy. He ended in 8th. There was also a brief virtual safety car for Albon, who just kind of punted a bollard into the track. Yeah, it was a bit less eventful. There were 4 total retirements, which was Bottas, Perez, Sainz, and Stroll. Well, Hamilton didn't do as well this time. We ended with Russell, Verstappen, Antonelli in the top 3. Good for Verstappen. The Mercedes I care to not see. And then Piastri actually was in 4th, which is good, and Hamilton in 5th. Then I had Norris and Leclerc. But yeah, Verstappen 5th to 2nd, I think, is probably one of the more eventful results, I guess, except for Leclerc dropping down that far. Is this just me complaining about Charles Leclerc having bad races? Yes. Yes, it is. Let's get to the quotes, which I enjoyed more than the race. We had Lawson, which obviously this isn't funny that it happened, but it is funny the way he said it. He said, "On fire, I've got fire in my car." And then a lap later, "I'm still on fire." I'm afraid that's objectively kind of hilarious to say. There was a German quote from one of the commentators, which was, "Der ist komplett im Ferrari sandwich," which means he's completely in the Ferrari sandwich, talking about Piastri, which I just find kind of funny. And then, Hamilton said, after being told to switch to mode TS, or perhaps T5, I don't understand my reading, and I don't know what that mode is. And, doesn't mean tire saving. Anyway, he said, "I already have no power." Yeah, even if he was having a good weekend, he probably wouldn't be having a good weekend on the radio. He always vaguely sounds like he's suffering, I can't lie. During the interviews, we got a Hülkenberg German interview, and he said, "Wir gehen ins Sprintwochenende, das wird würzig." And it's hard to explain why that kind of tickled me. It basically translates to, we're going into the sprint weekend, it's going to be spicy, except spicy in that connotation is just kind of like spiced or like full of spice, if that makes sense. I'm sorry, this is not as funny for everybody else, it's just funny for me. Yeah, those were the Barcelona, Catalonia, and Austrian Grand Prix that I wish to forget now. So I think it's just best if we move along to talk about a book instead, which is this one. I was struggling to find an Austrian book because obviously, Germany is bigger than Austria. So I was struggling to find a specifically Austrian author that was also queer. I did quite a lot of digging, and I found this book, which I think is actually self-published. It's by Jonathan Krupitza, and it's called Das Bittere am Tee, which means the bitter part of the tea. So I guess you'd call this a poetry collection, although it's not like in rhyme, but it's very poetically written. And it's very short chapters. It's like 1, 2, 3 pages long chapters. More like vignettes, I suppose. They're all titled with different teas. Yeah, it's very short. It's like about 50 pages or 55 maybe. So there's only so much I can say. It is in German because I think trying to find a queer Austrian author whose book is written in English, I would have had an even harder time. So I made the executive decision to read this one in German. I'm not a huge poetry reader. It's just not something I've gravitated towards. And maybe it was the poetry analysis I did in high school that just kind of put me off trying to find all of these things in poetry that I just personally couldn't find. But trying to not have the pressure of understanding what the meaning is, and instead just kind of, experiencing the art and just looking at it, I guess, kind of aesthetically, or just kind of what it does to me, if it unsettles me, if it makes me think, if it makes me emotional in some way, I think is a nice thing. And so in that sense, this is actually really good. I don't know, it's hard to talk about, but it did actually kind of make me think and kind of make me a little emotional at parts. Yeah, I think that's all I ask, honestly. So I enjoyed it. There would probably be other points in my life, maybe more turbulent moments in romantic relationships where this would probably hit more, talking about love and all of the complications and sometimes you love people and that's not actually good for you, or you're not good for each other, or you haven't grown into the person that could treat them right yet, perhaps. Maybe that's me overinterpreting. But yeah, that is, I guess, a very quick review of a very quick read, but it was enjoyable. Yeah, that was the very forgettable 2 Grand Prix and 1 not so forgettable book, which I guess is a good balance. Until I see you again, which will be for the British Grand Prix, which, spoiler alert, I enjoyed more. Take care, don't melt away, and stay hydrated. See you then. Bye bye.